The new Fire King structure deck is here and everyone is playing it, so today I'm going to teach you how to beat it. What's potion? You got Matt here and welcome back to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. The new Fire King structure deck has just released and everyone is so excited for this strategy even before we get all the amazing support from Phantom Nightmare that makes this deck a real tier 1 contender. So if you're looking to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh and you don't know how to beat Fire King, then you're going to want to stick around. Because in this video I'll show you the best cards to play against Fire King, when to use those cards, the choke points and weaknesses of the deck, and what decks are best suited to beat it. So if you're excited for the video and for our How to Beat series, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 100 likes, I'll bring you more guides on how to beat other competitive meta decks right away. Also, if you like deck profiles, combo guides, meta discussions, and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos just like this one, you're gonna love this channel. So make sure to subscribe and help us reach our end of year goal of 4,000 subscribers. That being said, here's the ultimate guide on how to beat Fire King in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. Let's jump into it. So the first thing we gotta talk about is what does the Fire King player actually want to do and how do we stop them from doing that. But before we do that, we have to go over what the deck actually looks like. And this is a pretty standard Fire King list that we see right now. You're gonna notice that the deck needs a critical mass of fire type monsters, usually between 15 and 20 of them to be able to pop off and activate their powerful effects, which all require these fire type monsters. The deck plays a ton of cards to boost its consistency. Cards like Pot of Prosperity and Fire Formation Tenki are really budget and super popular right now. On top of that, there's the Sinful Spoils engine or the Nadir Servant engine, which are also really popular to boost the consistency of the strategy. And you'll notice that all of these different little engines are pretty low in terms of card economy, so for that reason, they're able to play a ton of non-engine as well. Because the December 2023 format is so diverse, we're seeing a higher number of cards in the main deck. This is for two different reasons. The first of which is going to be it allows you to accommodate for more decks in the format right now that you might see over a course of a long tournament, and because it helps out a lot more with siding patterns. And by default, all these extra slots are going towards non-engine cards like board breakers and hand traps. But as far as the engine in the Fire King strategy, there should always be 3 copies of Legendary Fire King Ponix, 3 copies of High Avatar Kirin, 2 to 3 Sacred Fire King Garunix, 2 to 3 Arvada, 1 or 2 Barong, 1 Rangbali, and then 2 Fire King Island, 2 Sanctuary, 1 Circle maybe, and 1 Skyburn maybe, and then 1 or 2 copies of Garunix Eternity in the extra deck. So what's the deck actually trying to do? Well, their main goal is to turbo out a bunch of Fire King monsters to trigger powerful Fire King effects and create an awesome advantage loop with those cards. The advantage loop consists of cards like Ponix, Barong, High Avatar Kirin, and of course Sacred Garunix. These cards are all really solid to be able to get you additional cards in hand and on field to trigger powerful Fire King effects. They also most of the time are trying to end on Fire King Sanctuary, the continuous spell, because that card gives you the ability to quick Xyz on their opponent's turn, which is really strong because the Garunix Eternity, the Xyz monster, is a massive board wipe. And as long as they have 2 level 8s on field, they can get that board wipe, which is absolutely incredible for what the strategy is trying to do. Some builds are even incorporating the Snake Eye strategy with Snake Eye Ash and Snake Eye Flamberge Dragon. This allows them to end on some pretty scary boards that utilize some powerful Link monsters, including Salamangreat Sunlight Wolf and IP Masquerena. This can either get them into a few different cards, either Appaloosa for 3 or 4 negates, cards like Avermax, or even cards like SP Little Knight, which are all very powerful in today's format. So now that you know what the deck looks like and what the cards actually do, let's start talking about individual cards and how they interact with this specific deck, starting off with hand traps, and these are the ones we're going to be covering today. Ash Blossom will almost always be live against this strategy. It's pretty much everything, and because it doesn't target, they can't play around it very well, or even chain block to protect against it. The best card to hit with Ash Blossom, in my opinion, is Fire King Island. In a simplified game state, it'll get them access to any Fire King, but also let them destroy cards to get advantage. If you can't Ash that, I'd Ash the Barong in the standby phase, because that card can also get them literally any Fire King card. It's also important to know that if you Ash the Barong in the standby phase, they can't actually go ahead and use talents on you, which is pretty important. Droll and Lockbird is a slightly above average hand trap against the deck, but it really only works against very specific hands. If the hand includes cards like Tenki, Ponix, Prosperity, Nadir Servant, or just a few other options, then you can definitely prevent Fire King from getting the right resources in their hand. Just keep in mind the deck isn't completely destroyed by Droll, so there might be some better options in your side deck. Infinite Impermanence and Effect Veiler could be really great against this strategy, but they can also be absolutely terrible. If you successfully resolve Imperm against Sacred Garunix or Ponix, then you come out so far ahead, but they can always dodge it with High Avatar Kirin's ability to destroy the target. There are other hand traps I recommend ahead of Imperm and Veiler, but they're definitely some of the better options in the format right now, so you can definitely use them against this strategy too. Nibiru is pretty lackluster against Fire King right now. Some hands or combos play into it, but they can almost always just create a solid end board with only 4 summons. Honestly, you should have better cards in your side deck for Fire King than Nibiru, but just wait until Phantom Nightmare and Snake Eye Populace, then the full Fire King combo frequently plays into Nib. Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. Nope. Do not play it. To be honest, I just need to make new graphics and remove Phantasme since it's rarely good against the top meta decks, except for maybe 1 or 2 of them. Skullmeister is actually not a bad option. So much of the strategy activates in the graveyard, and a few cards can't even be chain blocked, so Skullmeister can shut down cards like Ponix or Barong in the standby phase, or even Garunix Eternity if no other cards can trigger when it's destroyed. Dimension Shifter is incredible, one of the best cards against Fire King. They can usually wait 1 turn to pop off, but they can't wait 2. They can do some stuff against Shifter, but they lose a ton of resources and all their cards activate when they're destroyed and sent to the graveyard. Basically, very specific hands can play kinda through Shifter, but they'll lose valuable resources in the process. Bystials really struggle against Fire King because most of the deck is made up of fire monsters, and Bystials need lights and darks, so it kind of comes down to hitting the extra deck cards or die a Bellstar, which honestly I don't recommend. Do not play Bystials against Fire King. DD Crow on the other hand is actually really good because almost every Fire King monster is weak to it. Arvada and Circle each target, Ponix and Barong need to be in the graveyard to activate during the standby phase, and if you Crow them in the draw phase then they can't activate. Other cards like Garunix Eternity and High Avatar Kirin may not target, but you can get rid of the biggest threat that they would bring back with them. DD Crow is going to be a very solid card in this format in my opinion. Ghost Belle is another card that's just average against Fire King. It can stop Garunix Eternity, Ponix, Arvada, or Kirin, but it's just not as high impact as other hand traps are for it to be widely played. If you have it, it's fine, but I wouldn't recommend it specifically for Fire King. Ghost Ogre destroys. Everything that Fire King has wants to be destroyed except for one card, Fire King Sanctuary. That is the only target to hit with Ogre. Either its effect to activate Island from deck or the Quick Exceeds. If you hit it with Ogre, then you're in a good position, but other than that, do not bother. Hand traps in general are decent against Fire King. Cards like Dimension Shifter are absolutely incredible. Cards like Ash Blossom are pretty good most of the time, but the rest of the hand traps are kind of just meh against the deck. But honestly, board breakers are kind of where it's at against this strategy, and these are the ones we're going to be covering today. Evenly Matched is really good against Fire King. They put up almost no spell and trap negation other than Rang Bally, so you can get rid of a ton of resources from the Fire King player. It is a great card against them. As good as Evenly Matched is, Dark Ruler No More is just as bad. Almost nothing has an on-field effect unless they use the extra deck. They can also just summon out new monsters using their Fire King effects in hand or in graveyard. Do not play this card against Fire King. Moving on to Kaijus, specifically non-level 8 non-fire Kaijus can be fine against the deck. What you're trying to do with Kaijus against the strategy is stop them from being able to Exceed into Garunix Eternity or give them extra fires to destroy with their powerful cards, but honestly there are better board breakers. As for Lava Golem, I wouldn't recommend it right now. It'll be much better after Phantom Nightmare when they start creating much bigger end boards, but for right now it just doesn't feel as good to hit them with Lava Golem as it would to hit them with other cards. Sphere Mode is even worse than Lava Golem. They rarely start with 3 monsters on field through their basic combo, and it doesn't even feel good to tribute them right now. Change of Heart targets and it's not a quick play, which hurts it quite a bit, but it does force out the early activation of Kirin in hand or even Rang Bally, which isn't actually that bad. Triple Tactics talent to take is actually quite strong. It doesn't target, which is really nice, and then you can link off the monster, meaning they won't trigger their destruction effects as well in the graveyard. Kashtira Fenrir is awesome against Fire King. Not only does it help play around the Garunix Eternity board wipe, but it can banish the field spell or any threatening monster. The targeting makes it tough, but it doesn't have to target a monster, and Fire King won't always have a card to deter you from targeting in general. Moving on to board wipes like Raigeki, Dark Hole, Lightning Storm, and Harpy's Feather Duster. So unironically, I actually think these aren't terrible against Fire King, even with them plussing off the destruction. The reason why is that they'll usually summon back worse monsters, and you can also force out effects earlier than they would like to. Kind of like how they aren't awful against Unchained. Also, it gives a very clear opening to OTK compared to not having access to it. Cosmic Cyclone is actually a really strong piece of back removal, specifically against the field spell. When it's banished, all their monsters get destroyed, and you can stop them from resolving the effect to destroy a card in their hand and search for any Fire King monster. There are definitely some cards against Fire King that are still really good against the strategy, but I didn't address in this section, but I'll be covering them in a second. I'll be dividing them into 2 different categories, cards that are good going first and cards that are good going second. Starting off with cards that are good going first. Going first, a card like Book of Moon is really solid. Not only does it help you play around a lot of the hand traps they play that target like Impermanent Veiler, but on top of that, a lot of the Fire King monsters need to have a face-up Fire King on field or a face-up fire in general to use their effects. So you can set it face down, they won't be able to actually use these powerful effects to destroy and gain advantage. Different Dimension Ground is also really solid because it's basically just a worse version of Dimension Shifter but can be played in more decks. If you set Different Dimension Ground and they activate an effect to destroy and you chain the effect of it, you'll send that card to the banish zone instead, and that's really good against what this strategy is trying to do because then it's really hard for them to recur those resources back. As for cards that are good going second, I want to start off with Soul Release. No, I'm not kidding. Soul Release from back in DM in 2002. This card is actually seeing play right now in the OCG specifically to deal with Fire King. Basically, the card allows you to target up to 5 cards in the graveyard and banish them, which is actually really solid against what Fire King wants to do, because if you can get rid of their resources, then it makes it really difficult for them to be able to just continue playing the game. So for that reason, it's not bad. Super Polymerization is a fantastic card going first and going second against Fire King. If they end on board with 2 fire monsters, you can either go into something like Garura to get a card, or to go into something like the Mudragon of the Swamp. Now you might be saying Garura is definitely the better option, but actually against Fire King, it's not. Mudragon of the Swamp is so good because you can use this effect, turn it into a fire type monster, and then your opponents can't actually target monsters with that attribute on their side of the field or on your side of the field, which means they can't target their Fire King monsters for destruction with cards like Kirin or Circle, which is so incredibly important for what you can do to stop this strategy. I've talked about a lot of cards that you can use against Fire King, but which ones are the best? Well, for the first time in the How to Beat series, I'll be bringing you a brand new segment, which is going to be the top 5 cards against each specific deck. Now, I do want to say that these cards are going to be specifically meant for non-engine pieces that can be technically played in any strategy. My top 5 non-engine cards to use against Fire King right now are going to be Dimension Shifter, Evenly Matched, Kashtira Fenrir, DD Crow, and Super Polymerization. Now let's move on to some choke points and weaknesses for the strategy, the first of which is going to be banishing. If you can banish their cards and stop them from going to the graveyard, it's actually really powerful. All these cards have to be sent to the graveyard, destroyed and sent to the graveyard, I should say, to be able to activate their powerful effects when sent there. So if you can banish them instead, that's really good. That's why cards like D-Shifter, Different Dimension Ground, and cards like DD Crow are all really powerful against this strategy. Non-destruction removal is also really good against Fire King. If you can return cards to hand or deck or banish cards, that's really good against what the strategy is trying to do because they want their cards to be destroyed. And if you can avoid targeting as well, that becomes even better too. One of the biggest choke points for the deck though is going to be the activation of Fire King Island. If you can prevent that from resolving because they will be able to destroy a card in their hand and search for any Fire King monster, it becomes really powerful and pluses them quite a bit. So if you can stop that from happening, that's a really good way to shut down what the strategy wants to do, or at least slow it down. As for another card, it's Sacred Garunix. This card is really good, and a lot of hands kind of rely on Sacred Garunix to just destroy any Fire King in deck to be able to then trigger their powerful effects in the next standby phase. If they can destroy the Barong in deck and use this effect in the next standby phase to search for any Fire King monster, they're going to plus significantly off of that. So if you can negate the Sacred Garunix, you're in a really good position. And just keep in mind, you cannot ash the effect of Sacred Garunix because it destroys from the deck. It doesn't actually send it from deck to graveyard, which is important to note. Moving on to decks that have a good matchup against Fire King, the first of which is going to be Unchained. The deck is obviously really good against what Fire King wants to do because Fire King destroys a lot, and Unchained, they want to have their cards destroyed. On top of that, the fact that the Unchained player doesn't need to destroy cards to be able to interrupt your opponents is really good. So you can link off their cards to be able to prevent them from activating their destruction effects, which is still really good. Now, I don't want to say it's an unwinnable matchup for Fire King, but it's still very difficult, at least until Phantom Nightmare comes out and Snake Eye Populace and Promethean Princess come into the format, and then the deck will kind of go to a whole new level against Unchained. Another deck with a strong matchup against Fire King is actually Purely, and the reason why is because there's no engine pieces that actually have a good time being able to out Expurely Noir. It's basically going to be cards like Underworld Goddess, Xyz Encore, Herald of the Abyss, Kaijus, and Book of Moon, I guess, in the main deck. That's really all it's going to be. It's just not enough to be able to consistently be Purely right now. And then a deck with a bad matchup. Unfortunately, Labyrinth again drew a really tough time against this strategy. This deck is able to just destroy cards pretty easily and be able to really trigger powerful effects. On top of that, the fact that they can get really big and beat over cards like the Lady Labyrinth and the Lovely Labyrinth is also really important. Fire King also has access to Kirin, and when it's destroyed, you can just destroy a card in the field without targeting, so even then it becomes really strong. If it targeted specifically, it would be a lot weaker, but Labyrinth just doesn't have the best time against this strategy right now. And there you have it. You now know how to beat Fire King in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Now let me know down in the comments, what deck are you playing this format, and did I miss any ways to beat Fire King? If you made it this far in the video, you must have enjoyed it, so do me a favor and smash the like button. If this video hits 100 likes, I'll make sure to bring you other guides on competitive meta decks right away. Speaking of meta decks, if you want a guide on how to beat one of the most underrated decks of the meta in Vanquish Soul, then make sure to check out the video right over here. And finally, consider subscribing for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos just like this one and to help us reach our end of year goal of 4,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching everyone, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.